It's the Stormwater Task Force meeting, the Stormwater Utility meeting, and it is 1:03, and everybody turn off your cell phones. Glad you all came. We have thunderstorms outside, but so far we've been doing okay. But and I think we'll be okay when we end. But first thing I'd like to do is do a roll call. Leticia Gomez.
Here.
Joe Vecchio, and I'm trying to get your name right. Vecchio.
You said perfect.
Yeah, you're so generous. Suzanne Good.
Here.
Bruce Williams.
Here.
Bob Suppes.
Here.
Susan Stewart.
Here. Elise Burns.
And Elise Burns. And Frank Cooper is absent. And right now Mary Peck is absent. And who else am I missing?
The front. Here.
Right here.
Oh, Jan Conacy.
Here.
Eric Seward. Janice Miller. Who else? Who am I missing? I should have all these memorized by now, but anyway, I received a piece of correspondence last night, and I want to read it to you.
Are there copies or no?
Excuse me. And I want to read it to you. I only managed to have time to print out 8 copies, but I'm going to pass them out as far as I can. I'm going to read it to you because it's very pertinent, and it's from a citizen here in town. He said, "Jay, I hope all is well with you. I've been following the stormwater tax work being done by the third-party tax advocate being paid by the taxpayer funds. I'm writing to ask if there is any science to back the assumptions that a residential home, with or without gutters, that drains into the residential lot actually produces runoff that gets into the stormwater system. My only experience is what I see on my lot and my neighbors. I see no runoff from my back or side setbacks. I see none on my front lawn that drains my roof line. I do see some on the fully paved section of my driveway. So I ask, why do I have to pay a rain tax? If there is no science behind runoff in the city, has there been perk tests done on soils around the city to see how well the land drains? Do we know how much of residential runoff ends up in the lakes? When I get caught in a rainstorm on Rehoboth Avenue, I see tremendous runoff of gutters and sidewalks, with water having nowhere to go. I think your group is misguided, not backed by science for residential lots surrounded by unpaved setbacks and lawns. The commercial zones, the densely developed sections of town, those that lack recharge areas, add to stormwater, not the residential areas like the Pines, with gravel section for parking, no sidewalks, and lots of drainage to soil. The city has missed many opportunities to provide permeable paving in critical sections of the city, surf and lake avenues. In my island winter home in Florida, we were required to dig up soil, provide perk test results to ensure our parking areas, as well as city parking areas, covered with gravel or paved stones and drain and not run off to the street. So we advocate a citywide tax. Why not look at some runoff data and find out who contributes the most to direct runoff to the ocean? Not the lakes. Tax them, not the residents whose rainwater drains into the sand soil of the Pines. And please, if we are doing comparisons with other cities, can we at least use small coastal communities, not Fairfax, Virginia, in tax-favorable states for comparison? My example was for Anna Maria Island in Florida, self-rule, local tax to fund municipal services. We are not Fairfax County, Virginia. What is Dewey, Lewis, or Fenwick doing about stormwater? What is Sussex County doing? Rehoboth should lead, but lead the way in new taxes, not backed by science. Just because a structure has a roof does not mean it contributes to stormwater runoff. Another thought I have not seen explored is small treatment plants for our 2 big lakes. No, another thought I have not seen explored is small treatment plants for our 2 big lakes. If we installed, recycled the water during dry spells, cleaned up water quality of lakes, And then during runoff of heavy rains, water quality to go out to the ocean has been improved. We could fund this by delaying the new lifeguard building a few years and by dealing with I think he means, and by delaying street beautification projects for another few years. Thanks for all you do to keep Rehoboth an affordable town to live and visit. Whew. We have our work cut out for us, don't we? We have our work cut out for us. There's a lot of lessons in here of things that we've done wrong, or maybe that we haven't taken the right, and this may be an outlier. This person may be an outlier. I just don't know. But it tells me what we have ahead of us. And before we get started with Christine's presentation, I want to ask for just some short comments. 1 sentence, 1.5 sentence, if anybody wants to comment on this letter I just read. Raise your hand if you want to comment.
I promise I'll make it short. Yeah, when we learned that 60% of the stormwater produced is generated by 40% from your colleague Dave, and those 40% are mainly C1 commercial structures. I am here, I say to this gentleman, I guess once we get a copy of the letter, we'll see who
I have a few copies,
very
and
erudite gentleman or woman is.
I'm going to take off his name, but I can tell you privately, but I'm not going to sing in public. But he's a good guy.
I don't doubt it. Very smart, too. I can see that.
Okay, coming down the line, any more comments before we go to Christine and her presentation? Janice?
My comment would be that if there are stormwater needs, you can basically make that a capital improvements program and put it in the regular residential tax program. The question is, are there needs? And if there are needs, then how do you pay for them? Do you do a separate stormwater utility, or is it part of the regular residential tax program? But it's all about need, and then once you know the need, then you figure out how to pay for it.
Jay, I think that I think that he makes a valid point in that everything should always be backed by science. And if the citizens of Rehoboth see that the money that they're going to have to pay is backed by the science, then they'll be, I think, more willing to. It'll be more palatable, put it that way.
Bruce?
And there is a difference between a tax and a fee.
Yes.
And we're talking about a fee, not a tax.
Yes, he jumped right to tax.
Yes.
Called us tax,
Rain
called
tax.
us
Rain tax.
Rain tax.
stormwater tax and a third-party tax advocate. That would be our consultant. Jan?
I would just say that at the very beginning, we raised the issue, and Janice brought it up from her experience, is that if you don't
Pull your
communicate,
mic a little bit.
if
There
you
go.
don't communicate to people about why this is an issue, if you don't lobby for it, if you don't do it, then you're not going to get any support for it. So when this Stormwater Committee started meeting, there should have been communication starting right now. There should have been, I know in Delmarva doesn't have a problem with putting a communication in your bill, but there should have been an education of the citizens of Rehoboth Beach, whether there was a handout in their bill, that allowed them to read about it, whether there was communication going on about this meeting and why it was. I have been on the Board of Adjustment, or I'm on the board, and I know people come in and they talk about awful stormwater issues, huge issues in residential neighborhoods. They're always in South Rehoboth, frankly, not the ones I've heard. But I never knew it at all. I didn't, because I live on the same street he does. I don't have any problems, and we just put in a pervious driveway. So the city itself is not doing what it needs to do, and educating people, changing the code to require pervious. Instead, we have these meetings, and most people don't know what's going on, and it's like a secret that we have a problem.
We had a notice in Lines in the Sand. I've given 2 presentations at commissioners' meetings.
And how many people get lines in the sand?
I think.
Everybody gets a bill.
I think she said 5,000.
Everybody gets a bill. And when you open your bill, you may not open lines in the sand, but when you open your bill and paper falls out that says something about stormwater, people probably pay more attention to it.
Can I ask Jan, I guess, specifically on this? I don't think the communication, sorry, I'm not sure. I think the communication, for instance, I think everybody in the city, myself included, is on board. This is critical. We could, a cautionary tale is what just happened in the UK. The stormwater system, which was aging and in trouble, overran the sewer lines, and they ended up with almost raw sewage in the beaches off the coast of Brighton, Fair England. So I think communication is not, I don't think it's going to be hard to convince anyone that this should be priority number one ahead of the streetscape and some other discretionary projects. But, so I don't think anyone has an issue about going ahead with $1.5 to $2 million per year for the next possibly 15 to 20 years. It's how to pay for it. Do we draw from, other revenue sources like the transfer taxes? Or do we start spending money on additional consultancy to get a data set, which we were told we actually had, but it turns out we may have to purchase this data set? And I would love, that's my question to Christine, or Christina? Christine, how much is this data set going to cost for the, 3,300 parcels in the city? Which I'd like to know the answer to that question.
I'm sure that'll be Christine. This is Christine Estes. She's the consultant from AECOM, and she's taken over, helping out for Dave. And we're glad you're here. Go forward.
Did you want to, there's one agenda item that I think was missed, approval of the minutes from last month.
Oh,
Do you want to do
yes.
that first?
Yes, you're right. Thank you, thank you. Let's do that right now. Has everybody had a chance to take a look at Amy's minutes from the last meeting? Do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Go.
How do I get this presentation up on the screens here? Do they just need to be turned on, or?
Can I say
Yes.
something while you're doing that?
Sure.
And I want to add to what Janice said. And I think the gentleman raises good points. But if we pay for it through the general budget, we are going to have a much lower base upon which to spread the fee. And we won't be able to include nonprofits, and it would have to be through the real property taxing authority, I would think, which would fall exclusively on homeowners, or a bigger burden would fall on homeowners. So doing a separate utility allows us to expand the fee base, the participants in the fee, and gets at some of this commercial properties or nonprofits that wouldn't necessarily feel the burden of just trying to squeeze it out of the budget.
And there's other advantages of a stormwater utility, and I think we've covered a lot of them, and Dave and Christine have covered them before. Transparency, equitableness, reliability, and then there's just a bunch of advantages for a stormwater utility. And that's what I think we should do, and I think you all agreed on that. You said we needed to get separate funding, and let's keep on pressing forward. The disadvantage of taking it all out of a general fund is just what you said. It's not equitable. It's disproportionate, and you're not evaluating the impact of each property that has impervious surface. Press on.
All right. Let's see. Yeah. So just wanted to go over a little bit about what I wanted to talk to you all about today. Please feel free to interrupt at any time if you have questions along the way. So we'll go over the goals and objectives for our discussion today. We'll recap what was discussed last month in the meeting, including on what was voted on and what we have left to decide. I'd like to briefly go over the ERU concept with you all again, just to make sure that everyone's clear on what that is, what the ERU was determined to be for the city of Rehoboth. I'll pull up, I have the spreadsheet ready to go if we want to dig into that and look at that again as well, including the variables that are built into that spreadsheet, the things that we can change and adjust along the way. Like to talk a little bit about mixed-use parcels and how the city would like to handle condos. Then we'll get more into credits and incentives, and then discuss a little bit more about planning for outreach, and then future task force meeting topics as well. So today there's some main things, there's a lot to cover today, as you probably saw from the slides already in the agenda. But I'd like you to everyone to really understand what that ERU, the equivalent residential unit concept is, and what that calculation is for the city. I'd like to, dig in a little bit to the different variables that we can adjust, cover some of those as well. And then, talk a little bit more about how you want to handle condos and mixed-use parcels, which will be treated differently from a single-family residential home. How you want to apply credits. I know that Jay had sent out the Fairfax Credit Manual, so we can get into that a little bit more detail as well, and also discuss about allowing for appeals.
Can I just briefly ask?
Yep.
Up the top there, it says equivalent runoff unit, and elsewhere, I think we've been referring to equivalent, and you said equivalent.
Residential unit, yep.
Are we using residential, or are we using runoff?
Runoff unit is more often used, but it is sometimes used as referred to as residential unit as well. And I'll
Just want to make sure that we're consistent,
okay.
whatever we choose.
So covering the August meeting takeaways again, it was agreed on that the stormwater utility will be a new revenue source, possibly a hybrid approach, pulling from the general funds as needed as well if you don't want to cover all of the stormwater program from the stormwater utility. That we will use the ERU method to establish a stormwater utility fee. Some exceptions that were agreed on were federal properties, state and city rights-of-way, and the Del Dot roads. You all did decide to include residential and commercial properties, Rehoboth Elementary School, city properties, and tax-exempt properties, including religious organizations.
Just to be clear, Christine, I was the one dissenter on a lot of this, including the elementary school. It's just transferring money from the Cape Henlopen School District, back and forth. But they have enough, retention ponds and things. I'm not sure they're going to suffer a huge stormwater fee, but nonetheless, I felt that was just a lot of back and forth. We all pay Cape Henlopen School District taxes in our Sussex County property taxes, but.
Did we discuss that
Yes,
as
we
a
did.
group?
Yes, we did.
Okay, all right.
Enough.
In the meeting notes.
Kate, remember, the school district has their own retention ponds, and they fill up, there's enough to handle a huge rain event. And then after the huge rain event is handled, if there's still more runoff, it runs off into Silver Lake. There's a overflow
Our
at the top.
stormwater retention pond for the city.
So I guess we get a little bit, maybe a day or two out of the year. I've never seen it run over. But,
I've seen it, we're next to it,
oh, that's right, you're in Newell Square. Have you seen it run into the lake?
yes.
So there's some that they cannot handle. And we should consider all those things. I'm not sure that they have runoff that matches the square footage that most people's runoff does, because they save up most all of it. But anyway, I'm sorry, press on.
Just 2 years ago.
So equivalent residential unit or runoff unit. What would you like to call it from moving forward? Residential or runoff?
Runoff.
Runoff, okay. Equivalent runoff unit. It is the method that is used by most stormwater utilities throughout the country. It is considered very equitable and fair, and we'll touch on a little bit about what the resident mentioned in his email as well regarding that. But typically, you develop that ERU, the equivalent runoff unit, from the mean impervious surface area from a typical single-family home. So and that has been assessed for the city. Dave had completed that a couple months ago. It's considered fair because it's really based on those impervious surface runoff. So in a lot of cases, the general tax base is, and I'm not sure what it is for the city. I can try to calculate this for you if needed. It would be helpful in the outreach communication as well. It's much larger than the commercial, but commercial most often contributes a lot more impervious surface and runoff. So this is putting more of the burden on the commercial properties by going with the stormwater utility in the ERU method. And we can provide details for the city that to use in that outreach communication, which I think will really go a long way in helping the residents understand that. It is also, question?
How do you determine how much, are you looking at the size of the house? Is that how you determine the pervious or impervious on a residential lot?
I think the University of Delaware used their GIS scan that measured the amount of impervious surface on every parcel.
How would they know? I mean, how do they know that my driveway is pervious or Elisa's driveway is pervious? How do they know that?
I suspect when they did the first, which was '09, I think, somebody correct me.
You can't tell from the air if something is concrete or.
I'll have to.
Yeah.
I'll have to.
I haven't looked at that
defer
GIS data
to
myself,
Kevin
but
and Christine.
Right, so the initial cut through, as you're looking at from overhead imagery, is probably not going to differentiate between whether it's pervious concrete or not. So that would be part of the process when we assess your particular parcel and it says it's 65% covered, then you would come back to us and say, yeah, but the driveway is impervious. That's a credit. Maybe we're going to decide to allot to individual homeowners. But the first cut was, I think, 2017 imagery that just, from above. So you're taking it from the 10,000-foot look down to see what's covered on your lot versus what's not covered.
So essentially, it's the house.
You may have a big concrete driveway is going to show
Well,
up
okay.
on the overhead as well.
Right, okay, all right.
But they were fairly confident on their method. It's not just pie in the sky.
No, I would
they
say,
felt
but
like it would
essentially,
stand
it's
up.
the house and a driveway, sidewalks if you have a sidewalk.
I'm sure they just see it as flat surface.
Okay.
This is
No,
10,000 feet
and not
from a
know
drone?
that it's
They use a drone?
pervious.
Oh.
Go ahead, Christine.
I'll just.
Yeah, and
add
we'll
more-
get
more-
into that a little bit
just-
too. Oops,
Just
okay.
real quick, more and more they can see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But not in 2000 and what?
2017
17, they
supposedly
probably
is the
couldn't.
best.
And
most
then
recent.
we
Yeah, I
had,
think
we had a
so.
gravel driveway. We went from a gravel to a pervious.
And we're always going to have the issue of, well, I built my house in 2018, right? Or
Right.
what have you. So, I mean, there's going to be a process where we're going to draw it as of 2017, and everybody's going to come in and say, well, I built it in 2019, and I did this and that. And we'll have that process made up so that you can then either appeal the judgment or, negotiate what you think is.
Or the city should do what they should have done like Dewey Beach did and require all hard surfaces to be
Is
pervious.
the last cut, is the last image, are we talking the numbers we've been working on, is that a 217 cut, or when does this,
Yeah, the imagery we used, I think was
From David?
2017, correct.
2017? So it shouldn't be horribly expensive for an update. Any ideas on what that would take?
I would say we do it manually. I don't think we're going to pay to have somebody else go overfly and produce the data. So we'll go with that set, and then we'll do the offs when whoever has a new house or an old house, those kind of things we'll deal with on the individual basis.
Okay.
Because I think what we'll find is the vast majority, even if you build a new house, you're not going to change that ERU much. You're going to be within that band probably, that it would be a tier or whatever we come up with tiers kind of thing. So, I mean, it'll be a process. We'll have to go through that process, but I think it's certainly manageable.
And the page from Christine's, the mean, is also from that 217 scan then? Okay.
Is, yep. And I'll touch on this later in the presentation too. The appeal process that the city will need to set up will allow for people, if they change their pervious driveway to impervious, they can submit that to the city to request a reduction in their percent impervious surface. So that is something to consider as well. And as we discussed earlier today too, the stormwater utility allows for a stable, separate fund that isn't competing with the streetscapes and street beautification projects. It's dedicated specifically to deal with stormwater. It's also legally permitted. There's a long history of successful court defense by setting up these stormwater utilities. Any questions on that before I go to the next slide here? This is more of a visual of showing how it's developed. This is, a typical city. You're not going to have all the same house everywhere. I'm sure you've seen that throughout the city. The ERU is based on that typical single-family home, which for the city is about 3,000 square feet of impervious surface. But you're going to have smaller properties. You're going to have properties with more impervious surface than that. So that's something that you can consider, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, is like setting tiers for the amount of impervious surface so that not everyone gets charged that one ERU. Some might get charged less, some might get charged more, to make it a little bit more fair based on the impervious surface area. Any questions on that? So this is just showing the graph of evaluating the impervious surface per residential properties within the city. And that the mean impervious surface area came out to be about 1,000 square feet, which is fairly typical throughout the country as well. In some areas in the city of Alexandria I work with, it was a bit less than that. It was about 2,100 square feet, but 3,000 is fairly typical as well. Any questions on that calculation? Yep.
Yeah, so in the city of Rehoboth Beach, you have a 50 by 100 lot. You can only have 50% lot. I'm sorry, Ann. You have a 50 by 100 lot. You have 50% natural area. Now, it was less than that a few years ago. So, and I'm sorry because I missed the meeting, but I didn't, when you're doing 3,000 square feet, do you count the footprint of the house?
All the impervious surface.
Well, I'm just saying, but if you have a two-story house and each floor is 1,500 square feet, are you counting that 3,000 square feet or the 1,500?
My guess is you're counting natural area.
You're counting the 1,500 of the okay, surface area. All right. Seems awfully high to me.
And am I confused, but I thought we were saying that if it's a single-family lot, that it's not specifically Jan's property or my property. So this is based on these averages, and these studies have done to set an ERU at 1 for a single-family home in Rehoboth. And then, so the specifics of the flyover of your house don't necessarily matter unless and until perhaps you seek to an appeal. Am I wrong about the process? Like, that's what I'm trying to say. The granularity of the flyover is sort of, we're using averages, I think, on the ERU. Am I wrong about that process?
I think you're correct.
Okay.
But my thought, Susan, was that, our houses are pretty typical, on our street and around town. And so if your bottom floor is 1,500 square feet, that's what you're covering. Then there's another 1,500 square feet is what you all are saying, what the ERU is saying, that is hard surfaced. That's a lot of square footage. Okay, that's all. Because people are going to ask that question. They're going to want to know, well, wait a minute, my house is only this much space. Where's the rest of it coming from?
So this is about a 60% coverage, right? 3,000 out of a typical 5,000 square foot Rehoboth lot. So if you had a 50% lot coverage in the code and you get 10% for other stuff, right? Driveways, outbuildings, sidewalks, that kind of thing.
Not outbuildings.
So that to me seemed like a reasonable number. 60% of your lot, typical lot in Rehoboth is impervious area. So to me, that passed the common sense
How do
test.
swimming pools, Kevin, because around, not our house, but around us, there are a lot of swimming pools. How are you going to treat those in terms of
We'll have to,
impervious?
we, we will decide.
Okay, that's a separate
How
question,
to
no
recommend
problem.
they be handled. But just as the common sense test, to me, that passed it, right?
When
With our lot coverage requirements in the code, And the additional for sidewalks and driveways and those extra 10%, 60 seemed reasonable.
When I built my house in '08, of course, you have to have it measured the day you get your certificate of occupancy. And I was within 8 square feet of having 3,000. And I think back in those times, people built almost to the limit with their setbacks, all the new houses anyway. So I suspect, of course, remember in 2015, we went to 50-50, but I suspect that 85% of the houses, well, maybe not 85, but I'll bet 75% are very close to 3,000 or 2,500 square feet. And as Susan was saying at the last meeting, there are a lot of smaller houses. And
A lot of what?
There are a lot of smaller houses in
Right.
town.
And there are a lot of larger ones that were built when you didn't have to
That- and
have
that too, and
setbacks.
that
I mean, I
too.
have them on my street too.
And
So
those
I'm
need to-
just,
I think those need to be adjusted, and as Kevin said, that's gonna be very doable. We're gonna have to be able to adjust.
You can see on that chart where they're all clustered toward the mean,
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's right.
above and below.
That's right. It's like a bell-shaped.
I can show you in the spreadsheet too how Dave has offered a few different tiers so that someone with only 1,000 square feet of impervious surface would be paying less than someone with 3,000. I can show that to you too. So.
And as you recall, Fairfax City started out with 3,000, and then they went back to 500. Oh, gosh. As you recall, Fairfax City started out with 3,000. I think they have a vote or a?
The ERU, what we ended up with is that the one ERU is equivalent to 500 square feet.
Yeah.
So each property then was analyzed and said, you have X number of impervious surface. So if you have 2,000 square feet of impervious surface, you pay based on 4 units.
Yeah.
Our cost per unit is $28.80.
Per year.
Yes. But we have a lot of properties.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, but
I mean,
that's a
what
reasonable
makes a
number.
difference. Yeah, but that's what makes a difference. But so if you had a smaller house a smaller property that was 1,000 square feet of impervious surface, their equivalent ERU would be 2 units. If you had a larger property, or if it's a commercial property with a lot of impervious parking areas, then that would be a larger number.
And we have houses that are even larger yet,
No.
and so they would have
I don't know
5 or
how
6
you
or
deal with
7.
swimming pools, so that's a whole different story.
And Jay, I'm on Scarborough Extended, and our lots are 12,750 square feet. So, that's looking at the half empty, half full thing. So you could have a large house on a lot that's 2.5 times. So at the outset, someone goes out and decides how many units of ERU a property has? Is that, Kevin, is that what we're talking about? Christine, is that what we're
That's
talking
my
about?
understanding, right.
Okay.
We would make that initial cut through, and then, it'd be a back and forth with each particular resident that would question how we got to that number.
So, but you're going to survey each individual house?
No, we're going to use the overflight data that we have. the
Oh,
GIS
okay.
data we
I
have.
thought that was what Susan was asking. Do each house.
And then have a very standard way to appeal, as you remember from the credit manual. And I think this is an easy way to handle it. I think if we can just educate folks, this is a very effective way. Well, everybody's been doing it, and so press on.
I
Oh,
will
what,
just
Jan?
ask, we talked about Fairfax City and Alexandria and other big places, but, the letter writer makes a point. What are other beach towns doing? What are Lewis, Fenwick, Bethany, what are they doing?
We went over with Dave.
Pardon?
Dave actually gave us some pretty, detailed information about the town of Lewis. which was what? It was just a set fee for every residential property because they didn't want to invest the time and money in figuring out, and they figured it's pretty negligible. What is it, $50 a year or something? They figured it was the magnitude was such they just sort of assumed people wouldn't bother to appeal it, and they've proven right. But Dave told us before, unfortunately, he was taken ill, that he fully expects one day it might be appealed because it's not really equitable just to be slapped with. Do you remember what it was, like $50 a year or
I think
something?
they're $10 a month, if my sister is correct. And they just voted to increase it over the next several years, a step a year, and I don't know what it was going to.
But that's the Board of Public Works, right?
Correct.
That's not the mayor and the commissioners, that's the Board of Public Works. So they have a different setup in Lewis than we do.
But it's an impact fee.
It
It's
is an
not a
impact
tax.
fee. Yeah.
So it's sort
But
of.
the mayor and commissioners don't have to run on that,
We're,
you know, because that's the Board of Public Works. I'm just pointing out. you
and
know,
that's what
the
we're,
political
that's what
realities.
we're doing. We're talking impact fee, and, but you couldn't bring in the amount of money we need for expenses and for maintenance and for capital improvements. There's no way you could do it on $50 a year or $100 a year, $200 a year. So we've got to look to the general fund to get some of that money.
Jay, you say we need to educate, and to me, we haven't done that since we started. And
No.
to me, if, as a homeowner or as a project that looks at a project, I want to say what's broken, what's it going to take to fix it, and then what's it going to do to cost to maintain it, right? And none of that is. This is fine. This is all great talk that we're doing here about how the fees, but we're putting the cart before the horse. We're not, so they're going to look at this and go, they're going to have to educate themselves on that. Why don't we start from the get-go and say, I don't know still what's wrong. I know that we have flooding, but I don't know the problems. And I don't know, but we're not educating. And
We don't-
haven't, and we've been 4 months and we've not done, we may put a letter that there's a task force, but we're not telling them what we're talking about, what we're going to charge them.
You're on the Education and Outreach Committee as right now. You're the
I
chairman,
just,
bud.
it's like, this is fine to talk
Yeah.
about, but me as a project, if I want to see a project, I want to see what's wrong. It's like if something's wrong with my house, you're going to come in, tell me I've got this old house, it needs new piping, it needs this, and I'm like, okay, it's my decision, but we don't know what's going on. We're talking about ways how to pay for something that people don't know what's.
If I could just say, I mean, we went through ad nauseum the CIP list and every detail of operational expenses that the Public Works Department has with regard to stormwater. And we did that, I think, in week 1. And he went into the spreadsheet and we showed you all those things. So I would just say that that information is available to anyone that really wants to go get it. The second thing is, we are a task force that's going to make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners.
We're going to make them to Christine.
So we've been very hesitant to get out in front of the Board of Commissioners with trying to sell a stormwater utility to the residents when the board has not said, yeah, we want to move forward with that. So this committee, this task force is going to come up with a recommendation to take to the board. If the board says, yeah, we want to move forward, I think that's probably the appropriate time to try to sell it if we do in fact want to sell it to them. So we've just been very hesitant to try to get out in front of that process.
Yeah, if I could just say, I mean, I brought this up a couple of meetings ago. Jan's brought it up. Eric's talking about it. I understand Kevin, I guess, not wanting to get in front of the commissioners, but to something someone just said a few minutes ago, as soon as it gets to the commissioners, it becomes political.
It's true.
And so then the general public of Rehoboth Beach are going to hear about this stormwater fee, this task force that's been meeting for 6 months, and they're going to say, how come nobody told me about this? Because not everybody reads lines in the sand or whatever it is. So I think that's a concern that I have, that we're going to do all this work, we're going to make a recommendation, and as soon as it hits the commissioner's desk, it becomes political. And then it devolves into or evolves into something else that we're not, this group is not, maybe could speak to it later, but that's just reality, And so I'm with, everyone here that wants to do a little bit of education ahead of time. How that gets done without stepping on commissioners' toes, I'm not savvy on, but I think it's got to happen.
So what we have agreed, certainly within the last 2 months, Commissioner Legree and our Chief of Communications got together. She did up a commo plan. So what we have done in the last 30 days is start with just generic stormwater kind of things, right? Very generic, not advocating one way or the other, do we need a utility or not need a utility, but simple stuff. Don't put something down the drain that doesn't belong in the drain, right? Those kind of basic stormwater things just to raise an awareness. But again, I'm very hesitant to get out in front of the commissioners with, hey, we're going down this road, we're going to have a stormwater utility, and it's going to be this, when all we're going to do is make a recommendation to the board. They're going to have to bite the bullet on politics if they agree with our recommendation, or whatever way they go. It's going to be political. You can't head that off, right?
I guess
So I want to make this as clean as possible,
Sure, no,
not political.
I understand it's going to become political. I'm just saying that it could become more contentious than it needs to be if people are educated leading up to. And so it's like, if I'm sitting there and I haven't heard about the task force, like, what the hell, what's going on? How come no one's talked about this? And you expect me to accept the fee? That's where my caution is.
And
I was going to say, it's difficult to get information out to residents.
Especially,
I mean, lines in the sand is one avenue, but there's, I hate to even say it, social media. I know that not everybody's on the City of Rehoboth Facebook page, but you've got to think multiple avenues. Lines in the sand isn't going to do it. Put it on the website, all that general information about, what is stormwater? What are our challenges?
Can I just add one quick thing? And that is, I spent my entire career as a lobbyist, and I have to agree with Letitia. You do not wait until it gets before the legislature to educate people.
Right.
You start doing it so that when the legislature comes and you bring them, and Elise knows that, you bring them the material that you want to do. They've already read about it. They've seen it on 60 Minutes. It's been in the newspaper. You have to, so yes, it's political. So I disagree with you on that. But frankly, our commissioners need to hear from people that say, I understand what's going on with stormwater. What are we doing about it? They need to hear. We need to educate people. If all you have to do is look at Mississippi, they don't have any water in Jackson or something, and all these places. I think we need to educate people.
I think Jan has a good point about putting information out in the bill. There was a July bill. We could have put it in. We could have put something in there.
let me answer. Okay. I could talk to Main Street at their next board meeting tomorrow. I could talk to Mark and say, I want to address the homeowners association at your next meeting. I could get Carol to let me talk at the chamber meeting. I could address any number of church groups in town. They would be very happy to hear anything that I had to say, that Kevin had to say, that any of you had to say. But we don't know what we'd tell them.
Say that?
We don't know what we would tell them. Would I tell them that they're going to be, first off, just like you, they go to the bottom line. They go straight to the bottom line. Should I tell them that it's going to be $100 a year, $100 a quarter? Should I tell them that we're going to charge the church? Should I tell them that we're going to charge the school? That's the first thing they want to know. How is it going to affect them and their pocketbook? Why do you need to do this? We have tourists and we have a big budget. Why do we have to pay out of our own pocket to do something that supports the community?
Well, I don't think
because
that's
it's
the right approach. I would never take that approach.
What would you do?
All you have to do is hear from people who have stormwater problems.
Is what?
Steer from people who have stormwater problems. If Kevin's project is Byard, right? Is it Byard and Silver Lake? Is that where there are problems?
That's one of them, yeah.
Among
Yeah.
others.
So what you do is you begin talking about, we have this issue in the city. we have flooding on Munson Street, or flooding on Silver Lake, or flooding on where, so that somebody who lives in the Pines, who maybe not have flooding on their street, said, oh my gosh, my neighbors, because we're a community, and a community works together to solve everyone in the community's problems, not just my street, it's everybody's. And so that's the message you send. You don't send a message, hey, we're charging you $100 a year because we have stormwater problems here. You talk about, what is stormwater? How does it come? I bet 90% of the people in town don't know that Lake Gerard and Silver Lake are essentially stormwater retention ponds. So you have to start from the beginning and talk about it. So when this committee was put together, it should have been, RBHA has a newsletter that goes out. SOLA has a newsletter that goes out. I'm sure Main Street has a newsletter. So does the Chamber. So there are things that the city is concerned about, the increase of stormwater and how we're going to manage it for the years. And it's all in the newspaper, the nationally and internationally. So no, you don't go out and tell people we're gonna raise your taxes or charge you this much money. You tell them what the problem is and how we're dealing with it and how it's affecting not your street, but it's your neighbors.
Well, those are all great
Except-
points, but I think we've always had an inherent problem with it. 70% of the homeowners are seasonal. We were back in the DC area attempting to wrangle 4 children. We really weren't able to dedicate the time to be informed when we were here. We were here actually mostly in the off season, Thanksgiving, whatever, winter break. So I think I just have empathy for the second homeowners who aren't here except maybe 12, 13 weeks in the peak season. I don't think it's easy for them to focus on this until we have rates or have, show them pictures that, Kevin, you have all those underground camera images. But, I'm just being realistic. I think there are people who have too many, fires going in Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC.
How about New York City? But we can agree to disagree, Suzanne. We can agree to disagree on that, because I believe that if you communicate in multiple channels, that you will eventually reach people. And so I'm finished.
This person doesn't have a problem. His runoff goes into the dirt, and he does not contribute to the problem. I wonder how many others like this.
But he's a member of the community.
I'm sorry, his runoff goes into,
His own yard.
His own yard, and,
fine,
yeah.
good. That's
But that doesn't change the
around.
fact that we have operating expenses relating to
Sure.
stormwater mitigation or capital deferred maintenance or that need to happen. And I think the nexus needs to be what happens to our beaches and our oceans and our lakes, because we've had beach, no swimming advisory. People need to make the connection that that's a community-wide problem. It's not good to not be able to swim.
And that comes under the heading of stating what the issue is before we talk about money.
Right.
Before we talk about costs. Get the issue out there.
Well, we have to talk about costs, or we wouldn't need a utility.
We will talk about costs,
Yeah,
of
we have
course.
to. And
But we need to do this in a stepwise way, and I think the first is education about the issue. And we can scare the shit out of people by talking money up front.
well, that'll do it. First we have to decide what we want to do. And we haven't done that yet. Once we decide what we want to do, we can go out and reach the people. If we go out, if I don't know what's going to happen, about the only thing I can talk about is, we have stormwater problems. We have $2.1 million a year that we need for O&M and CapEx, and people just.
Jay, you're reading about 1,000-year rains. It's on the news every night, people being flooded out. You would have to be, Totally, this is a fairly well-educated, sophisticated community. You would have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to know that it's raining like crazy and people are having problems.
With all due respect, Jan, the problem is not 100% of the population who sees data from the 1930s, from the 1850s. There have been these monsoon-like events throughout the last couple centuries. Now, I'm not saying, I also am very concerned about climate change, but I don't think we can assume that 100% of the citizens in this city think that we are solely responsible, for stormwater management
We
that
don't
goes
have to have
beyond the
100% of the,
absolute-
you never have 100%, Suzanne, as
Right.
long as you have a
But
majority.
I do agree. I mean, we don't, for instance, we don't know, we're always told that the wildlife is to blame for these swimming advisories. How do we know that it's not more stormwater? So we don't have good information.
It's interesting because it happens mostly at Rehoboth Avenue, where there's food,
Right?
there's birds,
Seagulls.
there's people, there's parking, there's pavements, so it's no mystery. I mean, perhaps it's wildlife, but if it's always happening at the busiest commercial center, then maybe the explanation includes other things too.
And we have an outfall which only goes a mile out, like in Boston, it goes 10 miles out. Now, we needed that outfall, we couldn't manage otherwise, as I'm sure Kevin would agree, but we have to educate, I think there are a lot of people in this town from whom I've heard who are skeptical about the reasons given for these, fairly regular swimming advisories.
Please press on.
Yeah,
I just have to say, fairly regular is 3 in the last 3 years.
Oh,
So if
really?
that's
There were-
if
weren't
that's
there
fairly
two
regular,
this-
then okay.
Okay,
but
weren't there
it's
2
3.
this
that-
summer, though?
There's been 3 this summer.
3 this summer.
Nothing the year before and nothing the year before.
Okay.
So that leads me to the next thing, with compliance, living in a world of compliance, if we're gonna go for this permit, you're gonna probably see either more fees or more shutdowns. If you're gonna apply for a permit, an MPDS permit, you're gonna have to live in a whole different world than we're living in now, which, so.
Yeah, thank you.
A pollution discharge, which is part of this project, you'll see, which is a step above, and I'm not disagreeing with that, we don't need it, but we're having problems now, is what I'm saying, versus, you get under the eyes of the state, the Denmark, where you gotta put reports in, I don't know who's shutting down, I think that's just public health, I used to work for public health, and you shut down this because you see high, but when you get in the world of living with DENREC, you're gonna see more fees, you're gonna see more inspections, you're gonna, when you say, yeah, I wanna do this permit, which is part, I believe, which is the final part of this.
Well, we're
end. So, right,
we're hoping we don't need a
Well, that's
NIPS
good,
permit.
'cause-
We're trying to avoid that. So we're trying to do the things that we need to do prior to being regulated, so we don't get regulated.
Okay, I thought we were heading for that.
The country is heading that way.
I agree, I live that.
We're trying to avoid that as long as possible. So by doing the right things, then maybe they'll leave us alone.
Okay,
Yeah, that's kind of the thought.
all right.
We're halfway through time-wise. Let's go ahead and finish. We're paying Christine. Let's see what she has to say.
All right, I'm going to pull up the spreadsheet and dig into this a little bit more than I did last month. Before I did that, though, I just wanted to note here, one of the things that, one of the variables in the spreadsheet is to set the minimum impervious surface that we will be charging. You can see here there's about 45 properties that are below 100 square feet of impervious surface. So do we include those or do we not? So that's one of the questions that I want to ask as we go into the Excel spreadsheet here. Let me pull that up.
Those are almost empty lots, those 45 you found.
Right, there's less than 100 square feet of impervious surface on it, so do you bother charging them for that little amount or not? That's a question. So the way this, can you all see the Excel sheet okay here? I can try to zoom in a little bit more. Let me zoom in a little bit more here.
It's just about impossible for
great.
me to read.
Better?
There you go.
Very good.
So Dave, just for all of these white cells can be adjusted as needed. And the ultimate goal, obviously, is to come up with a program that meets the expenditures that you have on a yearly basis. So these things can all be adjusted to ensure that you all make enough money from the stormwater utility as you need. So the minimum impervious surface, it has been set at 100. It's something to decide on, though. It's pretty typical. A lot of cities will not charge less than that amount. He has in here the 3,000 square foot for the ERU that I discussed previously. He also, we can change this up to have different tiers options. As I was discussing before, you can charge people with less than 3,000 a lower fee than those that have more than 3,000 square feet of impervious surface. So the more tiers you add, the more equitable it becomes, but also the more administrative burden. Typical is about 3 different tiers to charge to different residential properties. But single tier, obviously adjust the numbers a little bit, so we'd have to adjust other things if you just want to charge everyone the same fee like Lewis does right now. So 3 tiers is typical. I'm going to set it at that. We had already decided to not include the rights of way, so that's set as no. The expenditure basis is another one to decide on. Right now, it's only for the operation and maintenance costs. If I go back over to the expenditures, we went over this last month, but just to recap on that. And these numbers do need to be updated a bit, but these were based off of when Dave last did this. But the capital expenses here, if you want to use the program to cover any of those, obviously we need to increase the fees to cover that. So this file can be adjusted to change the level of that you want to generate from the stormwater utility. We are including the tax exempt parcels, so that's set as yes. And so down here it shows basically this is how much you'd have left after the first year if you had set one ERU at $200. If you change it to 150, oh, so it's not letting me do that. Yeah. Oh, it's not letting me change it right now. But we can change the rate, obviously, to adjust how much revenue is accrued here.
So is the equivalent residential unit like a 50 by 100 lot? What if you have a 100 by 100 lot? Or as Susan said is it always the same no matter what lot size you have?
Shouldn't be.
Say it again, Jan.
If you have, like Susan mentioned, she has 12,000 something square feet on Scarborough Extension. So lots of people in the Pines will have a double lot, or anywhere in town, or 75 by 100, a lot of lots over on South Rehoboth. So if you have more than 5,000 square feet lot, so if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, then do you pay the same as a 5,000 square foot lot?
It's based on runoff, not the size of your lot.
Right.
Yeah, but how do you determine the runoff? If you're doing it from overhead,
How they do it, they measure.
Unfortunately, it can be done with a double lot, right, Kevin? Yeah, it's a simple algebra problem. I think a middle schooler could actually cope with it, probably.
Okay, all right.
But that's, we have the 40, did you have more granular data, like the 45 structures you found were under 100 square feet? Did you possibly have other, well, you had that graph, so I guess that's what we have.
Right there.
Right.
Yeah, so we have.
So this is the number of parcels here. So there were about 45 that were under 100 square feet.
Do we have any kind of a consensus that we should have a minimum for everybody, like we do on water? Maybe a minimum could be, if we used 500 square feet ERUs, we could have a minimum be 1 ERU or whatever we wanted to do it. But
Would this include completely unbuilt lots?
everybody should pay a fee, like we do water. Whether you use your water or not, you pay a minimum.
But if you have an unbuilt lot, you don't have a meter.
Yeah, that's right. If you don't have a meter, you don't pay.
So you don't pay.
If you have a lot that no rain falls, maybe you wouldn't have to pay.
But someone who owns an empty lot might feel I'm actually on net helping the city's, stormwater runoff. So I think you'll get pushback from these people who are lucky enough to own, empty lots, and they're just sitting. There's one right on Henlopen Avenue around 98 or 100. It's been vacant for 5 years at least.
Every piece of dirt in Rehoboth that gets rain has to deal with stormwater one way or another. So everybody gets stormwater. Some runs off, some don't have a street in front of their lot. I'm sure there are lots that haven't. I don't think I run much stormwater at all. I don't have, I soak it, everything's soaked in. But everybody should have to pay a minimum, in my opinion. The committee may feel differently, and we'll decide that.
I think that's what Christine was saying, the minimum of 100, I guess that's square feet
Yes,
of
impervious surface.
impervious. And so that would cover, if you adopted that minimum, it would take the lots out.
Yeah, it would be
Unless
like,
they have a structure on them.
yeah.
Yes, an empty lot with no impervious surface on it would then not be charged.
Is that then kind of typical of how jurisdictions have handled that, or
That
did?
is typical,
Okay.
So they've set a minimum,
yes.
which to me makes some sense from an equity point of view, because you're asking everyone, including raising some user fees on tourists. You're sort of asking everyone who, ever enjoys the city to help share the burden. So yeah, I would personally, I want a minimum seems to make sense to me.
Keep going, Christine.
Okay.
Well, did we want to see if there was agreement?
Yeah, sure.
On a minimum?
Minimum?
We can decide any time. We can decide that when we do our funds. We can, doesn't make any difference. If everybody wants to deal with that now, we can.
No, let's keep going.
You want to do it now or deal when we do the funds, when we decide how much the fees are gonna? Let's wait.
Yeah.
Let's wait.
Yeah, let's go.
Keep going.
Well, another thing to discuss is the expected annual escalation. Dave has in here 2%, but that's really, I think something for the city to decide if they want to plan for higher escalation with inflation the way we've seen it. You might want to plan for something higher than that.
But our stormwater, our lot's not changing, so.
But the remediation, cost of remediation escalates.
Maintenance.
Labor, materials, 2%
Okay.
is
Yeah,
unrealistic,
okay.
probably.
But, well.
Gotcha.
I think what she's asking is, are you asking us if we want different zones?
This is just for planning purposes. So not just your first year of the program, but over 5 years. How do you want to estimate your expenditures will need to be increasing each year?
Like 5% maybe sounds more, reasonable right now, and it's probably an underestimate, but like 2% to me is back in the 90s or early this century.
Kevin and Evan will be able to do that probably more accurate than anyone else when we do budget time. But I think we should we should consider some kind of an escalation factor in our fees.
What is our water
Our
supply
Our
system?
water right
How
now, our
about-
water and sewer is set flat for 4 years. And most other cities have a cost of living every other year.
Well, then you're gonna have a hard time
It
selling.
rises a lot again.
You're gonna-
Is it 2024? Kevin would know those, when our water and wastewater treatment fees they're going up again in 2024?
Yeah,
April 2024.
I didn't know what that was, but if you're telling me that it's not going up for 4 years, then how can,
Of course, you can't say that. We've just had a flat fee for 4 years. Our costs have gone up. Yeah.
I'm just comparing apples to apples. I pay water, I pay stormwater, that's all I'm saying. One doesn't go up and one does.
Aren't the
There's a math
projections,
that really proves that that's
aren't
not
the
true.
isn't the underlying 5-year projection already have an escalation in it? So isn't that a redundancy to the base? Do you see what I'm saying? Those projections that Kevin and Dave did, I think, assumed cost escalation.
Correct, they had a 2% per year. I think the question was, what we're seeing over the last 2 years and certainly this year going forward, it's much higher than that. So do we want to go back and just kind of revisit that look?
So that's feeding into your formula. If we change it on the face page, it feeds into, got it. I thought it was the other way around.
Well, I don't know the spreadsheet that well. but
Okay, got it,
somewhere we
got
put
it.
in what that
These
cost
numbers
increase
here
is.
showing the expenditures will need to be updated before a final fee is
Yeah.
set.
They should be linked.
They should be
They-
refreshed.
that-
Yes,
that-
they have to be linked.
They should be
Yep.
linked. When you say we'll put in 5%, for instance, and it should change all your out 5-year
Yep.
things. Okay.
I'm not sure if it's,
Because otherwise, it's a
Correct,
redundancy.
Right.
No, it's a cumulative. If you escalate it in the underlying and then you add another escalation, then you're multiplying it.
It's like
I
compounding
think
interest,
most-
it's the
most
same
communities
concept, right?
Have it worked in, don't they? Don't most communities have a cost of living increase on their wastewater and their freshwater every other year? Or I've studied Cape May, that's the one but I think most communities have a cost of living escalation calculated. I know that Washington DC does, and they don't try to have a flat fee, or they try to
I
predict.
think it's more a question of a spreadsheet question than whether anybody wants to have a cost of living adjustment, unless, Eric, you might be an outlier.
No, I'm.
You're happy with that?
I didn't know if my water doesn't go up, which it goes up every 4 years, it sounds like. That was just a question. I didn't know whether my water and sewer went up, but.
So water and sewer, a little bit different, so I'd rather not go down that road because we fought that fight a couple years ago, Suzanne. And we made a conscious decision. We had annual costs increase, but then we wanted to flatline it so that people could plan on, here's going to be a rate for 4 years. Then there's going to be a big step because we had major, capital projects to pay for, the outfall, $40 million, right? So a little different on water, sewer, and that's why it's got, a 12-year span, 4 years each, so people could plan for it better.
Okay.
and Dave does have this built into that Excel sheet to just change the inflation factor here to adjust
Okay.
everything. Yep.
And that's a yearly escalation, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. One other thing I wanted to talk about on the Excel sheet here is changing the tiers. Is that something you all want to discuss? If you think every residential, this is just for residential properties, not the commercial properties, if they should all just be charged the same fee? Or do you want to set 3 tiers, 4 tiers?
My gut feeling is that Rehoboth is probably one zone. I mean, you could argue about it, but it would be much simpler if we just had one zone and we had a flat fee, whatever we decide. I think David decided 14 cents a square foot, but
You don't
that's a
worry,
single
Jay,
zone.
that because there is a lot of disparity, you have some people who build these so-called McMansions with 7, 8 bedrooms, 7.5 bathrooms, but you do have people like ourselves. Our house is for utilitarian purposes. It wasn't to max out the lot to have renters galore all summer. So I think a lot of people would object to that because you do have people who made a conscious decision not to build to the maximum FAR. And then you also have the people who inherited the grandmothers, who were lucky enough to inherit the grandmother's, beach shack.
That's a totally different
So
subject.
the tiers really, to me, are pretty critical here. I don't think we're gonna get away with one tier only.
How you use your house is unrelated to what we're doing. It's
But the
amount of-
tiers,
it's
the
amount of
tiers, I
impact.
don't think we can not have more, I think having just one tier is open to.
I don't understand the tiers.
We're wasting time.
Bruce has.
Just a quick comment.
So most stormwater utilities that I've seen do have 2 to 3 tiers or more. Obviously, the more that you add, the more complicated it is to get, the bill structure set up to build people, but.
What are those tiers?
So just in general for the city, maybe 2,000 to, if you're setting that minimum at 100, so anyone with 100 to 2,000 square feet might be charged 0.6 of what the 1 ERU is. And then from 2,000 to 4,000, you charge them the 1 ERU fee, and then above 4,000, maybe 1.5. So you can adjust those numbers for those different ranges, so
you're
that
double.
those with more impervious surface are paying more, obviously, than those with much less.
What we're doing, we're charging them double. We're charging them for the stormwater impact that they're having, they're 14 cents a foot. And then we're charging them for having a big house. Or if they have a really big house, we're charging them for even more. All the while, they're paying the same amount for runoff. Do I make myself clear?
I'm not following.
No,
They're paying more, okay, they're paying more for their runoff with their big house than they're paying for another person who has a medium-sized house.
Right.
Someone with much larger, more impervious surface on their parcel would be paying more than someone with much less.
Maybe I'm lost. I'm thinking square footage.
It's based the square footage of the impervious surface, not necessarily of the interior of the house. So it's just basically where the rain is hitting and runs off. That's what's getting calculated.
Oh, then we're probably talking about the same thing.
So,
The other thing that would enable us to do is, because our typical lots are fairly small, there's not a lot of things you're going to be able to do to, I mean, you're not going to build bioswales, and you're not going to build retention basins, that kind of thing. But if we have the ability to, get to maybe you're near, just over the top, maybe you're just above that 2,000, with a little bit of rain barrel or something, maybe drop you into a different lower tier. And that would be really helpful in the incentive process.
Yeah, sure.
To get people to do things that they could actually do that might see the fee lowered.
Sure.
Jay, just a quick comment. In Tacoma Park, we started out in the mid-90s with one tier, and 20 years later, it was very obvious that there needed to be multiple tiers. So I think we went to 5 or 6 tiers from one, and it's much more equitable.
And that, how did you divide your tiers? Was it industrial zone against residential zone?
It was based on the tiers in the residential zone, and then the
It's
other
all-
ones were
yeah.
multiples.
Based on the calculation of impervious surface.
Yes.
Oh.
It's
I call
not
that
based
all
on
one tier.
zoning at all. It's
Gotcha,
all based on
gotcha,
the
sure.
percent
Keep
impervious
going.
surface. So, okay. One thing I wanted to note on here too, we're going to talk about credits in a little bit. So you do have to consider, if you are allowing credits for people to reduce their fees, you have to take that from your expected revenue. So, we can, obviously we're going to have to make assumptions because you don't know how many people are going to apply for credits. I think a good assumption might be about $10,000 a year that might be reduced from those credits. It may be more in later years as more people understand the program and apply for credits, but
But that's kind of what we want, isn't it? We want to control the stormwater.
if people are reducing the runoff, then you want to incentivize that for sure.
Okay.
So
Yeah, do any of us not want to consider those incentives and credits?
I know, I have one concern about when I read the Fairfax one, that when you offer somebody $25 off the fee, I want to make sure that there's equivalent lessening of expenses. And so in other words, what they're doing is actually effective and not just sort of window dressing and fun stuff.
Right.
That it actually diminishes a fee on that side. So if I put in a pervious driveway, take out impervious, what is the costs that are reduced by that?
right.
Because that's my concern. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that seems kind of making the people who put it in feel good about it. No disrespect.
No.
But do you know what I mean? And really doesn't really diminish. I mean, we have these expenses that are every year already, and capital expenditures that are desired to shore it up. And if I put in an impervious drive or a pervious driveway, does that help Kevin's budget? That's I get why it's all for the good, and if everybody did it, it probably would have an impact on the anticipated expenses.
Especially if all new construction was mandated.
That's true.
As it is in most places.
Right.
That have these issues. as it is in Dewey Beach, for God's sakes, you know.
Changing the building code to me has
The,
always been what we should, one
I
of the
totally agree.
aspects of this. And I'm worried about the administrative burden of these credits, like we even, that Fairfax does. We're not Fairfax County, Virginia. I'm familiar with Fairfax County, Virginia. We're like the antithesis of Fairfax County,
Jay?
Virginia.
Janice?
Jan,
When
go.
we talk about credits, our consultant, when the question was asked, what percentage of people will apply for credits? He said 5 to 10%. So you're not,
No kidding.
yes. He said in generally that, is that your understanding?
That's
Christine?
typically what I've seen.
That's typically what
You're
we
not
see.
gonna get a huge
So-
reduction
So,
when people apply for credits.
I mean, we may be arguing about something that is totally
Yeah, we may be.
meaningless and it's up to and it's not that difficult to apply. Most people just go,
That's true.
so I mean, rather than belaboring this, I just wanted to toss that out.
Good idea. And everybody who would like to take a look at the Delaware Post-Construction BMP manual will see in there, they have 16 categories of different post-construction practices, they call them. And they have percentages on each one. And you can go and look up pavement, and you go down to the chart and you can see what percentage. You can look up infiltration in biosoil, and you can look down there and you can see how much nitrogen goes and how much. So those are available. But we just need to decide if we want, and I think we want to do, but whoa, 10%? Is that worth the administrative, go to Susan?
I mean, we will find out because we are collecting in Fairfax City right now. The process is open to apply for credits, and we'll see what turns out. And when I get that information, I'll let you know.
Because I mean, you guys give credit for somebody who just promises not to use fertilizer and stuff.
Yeah.
Even
So
though
we'll
enforcement
see whether
seems
people
like
fill out the form.
impossible.
It's been, we have advertised, we've sent information about how to apply, and we'll see who applies. People are people. I don't know what you want to say.
Christine, do you have a similar chart for commercial, the equivalent runoff units? Like, we haven't seen the discussion of
Usually-
commercial properties.
Right, commercial properties are usually charged directly based on their percent impervious surface. So they're not grouped in like residential properties are.
Well, I'm asking
And we
because of
don't have that
tiers.
many either,
Don't
which
have-
helps.
Well, we have enough, but I mean,
No,
to
we don't
me-
have that many.
Okay, well, even though we don't have that many, tiers become very relevant.
So
If
we
you're
could
like a
measure-
much
we
larger
could
hotel.
measure
And the tiers are
each one if we
usually-
wanted to.
Tiers are usually only applied for the residential
Okay,
properties.
what's the precedent for not ever applying them for commercial properties? You just do it
Typically,
straight
the
up
commercial properties are
percentage?
charged directly based on their impervious surface. so.
Okay,
So we're charging, I'm just using the term 14 cents, which I know is going to go up once we get the lakes involved. But commercial property gets charged 14 cents for their parking lot, whereas you get charged 14 cents for your roof. And that's what I was saying in the very, very beginning. I think we're a one-tier county, one-tier city. But, and just everybody pay for square footage, whether it's 1 ERU or 2 ERUs or whatever it is. That seems really equitable to me. But boy, I'm just listening, so keep going.
And I can provide more details I don't have them today, but on what those suggested tiers might be for the residential properties. There is quite a bit of distribution if you do look at the graph.
Yeah.
So there'd be, quite a few that would be over 4,000 square feet. So if you do want to separate them out.
and swimming pool decks, I assume, are the impervious, but the actual basin, is that considered pervious? I
Like
mean,
a
but
pond basin or
like,
a
no, a
stormwater basin?
swimming pool, we have like, I don't, there must be at least, what would you say, Kevin, 500 of them in this city? I don't know, I don't have one.
Keep going, Christine.
Yeah,
We
I-
gotta
I-
stay
I'm
on
not
I'm
track.
not sure. I
The
haven't looked at
answer
the
is
GIS
about how
data
they're
myself,
treated.
if those
Okay.
are actually picked up as part of the impervious surface
Okay.
or not. But if that's something you want to exclude, that would have to be,
I do not
analysis would have to be done to take that out.
Mm-hmm.
So. Okay. Let me go back to the presentation here on these variables. We did talk about the minimum impervious surface to receive a fee, annual escalation. I think you'll probably need a little bit more details on deciding on the residential tiers. Is that correct? Yes. Before you make a
Yes, that
decision?
would be
Okay.
very helpful, yeah.
And then the expenditure basis, I wanted to touch on this again about only using the stormwater utility to fund operation and maintenance, or also including the capital expenses as well. It is quite a difference. The fee would have to be raised quite a bit to cover those capital expenses. So another option is to use general funds to help with some of those capital expenditures as well.
So for a 3,000 square foot residence, what would looking at your numbers, I can't see, I'm sorry. What would it cost me in a year? What would my fee be for a 3,000 square foot single-family residence?
Conservatively, $200 a year, so $50 a quarter, right?
The 200 covers only the O&M.
Oh, dear, this is the problem.
Okay, that's,
What if you did with the capital?
Yeah, how much are we talking?
So with the capital, and it's not letting me change this number here, but it would probably have to be closer to 300.
300 a year.
Change it to, yeah.
That's only 50%.
The
That's
cell
not too
is
bad,
locked.
that's 50%
She
more.
can't
And it's,
manipulate the cell. It's locked. He's
There's
locked this
there's an
spreadsheet.
Excel person up here.
with the capital
I can
expenditures,
appreciate
you
why
say,
you
you
would
see
do
only
that.
300 a year per 3,000, well, per 5,000 square foot lot with a 3,000 square foot structure?
It's not clear yet.
Okay.
$420 a year.
420 a year? Okay. All right,
If you pay,
Capital.
if you pay everything.
okay.
If you take 39% out and run that from the general fund, then you get down to probably in an area that people would tolerate.
Well, actually,
I can figure it out.
people who are buying new houses now are paying $3 million for a house on a 50 by 100 lot. There isn't anybody I know who paid $3 million or could probably afford to buy their own house now, or most people I know couldn't. So you have to take in two kinds of people. The investors who are renting their house, and they'll just raise the rent to cover the expenses, and the people who live here or don't rent their house and who have been in their houses a really long time and don't have $3 million in it. So from a political point of view, you've got to look at both of those scenarios. And what will happen then, from a political point of view, if you can't raise the money for the capital expenses and things get worse and you need to, then you'll raise taxes, right?
Or you raise user fees
Or
on
you raise
the
parking
tourists.
fees.
See, I think that's part of the discussion we're sort of missing. We did a 60-40 proportion, didn't we, Kevin, with Dave before Christine took over, in terms of how much was going to be borne by user fees on visitors and how much was going to be borne by property owners. I don't think there's ever like a perfect answer to that.
Let's talk credits and not get into money until we talk funding.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, you don't have to get into money. I'm just curious, because when you're selling something, if it's $200 a year or it's $500 a year, that's a big difference. So,
I don't think it's so much we're at that point right now. One, and I don't want to offend anyone, but I would love to hear what Christine has to say. I'm sure she makes $200 an hour, and I would love to finish it so I know everything that's going on. Because one, we have to do something, and I think that everyone has to share part of that minimally. And to get to the numbers, and even tiers, in my opinion, is not where we're at right now. Where we're at is, if there's one tier, and this is what everyone pays, this is what is solved. And then when we get to the end of that, we decide, okay, is that enough to get everything done that Kevin needs to get done so the town doesn't flood, so I can still pay my car payment because I need, people to come and eat in my businesses. So right now, we need to decide and hear what she has to say. have her tell us what the things we can change are, and then at the end, vote on those things and decide, here's our money, here's what needs to get done. Will the city cover what's left if if the people that buy the $3 billion home do not want to pay that much money? So let's hear what she has to say, get through the presentation. You know, we only have a half an hour left. I'm not even sure how much longer you have, but I want to be educated on everything and just absorb it and then just do research at home and then decide, right? Is it $30 a month? Whatever we have to pay to get it done, because we have to get it done. And at this point, we're never going to get through, because all the comments I hear, we're backing up to the beginning and we're talking about things we've already debated. And I keep looking at you. I apologize, Jan. You were the last one to speak, so I'm putting all my energy out on you. But we've gone through this over and over, and so I'm going to take a sip of water, and let's all just keep our comments to the end and just hear what she has to say and absorb, write down your questions, and then go. I feel like I'm Jay right now. I'm not running for commissioner, I swear, but I just want to get through what she has to say, and we know what we can change and what we can't. But if we don't get through this, we're never going to know. Is that fair?
Take it
Sorry,
away,
I don't want to
Christine.
offend anyone.
Correct. And let me just, because we just talked about whether we're going to do O&M or whatever, we did last month elect to include the city parcels. So that in effect is coming out of the general fund, right? Because we're going to put a fee on our own properties. So just keep that in mind as we look to how much is the city going to be fronting or paying versus how much we're going to get in from the additional fee.
Exactly. Everyone should pay, right? No matter the city except the federal government. We decided last meeting the post office does not pay their bills. It's the federal government. The city should absorb it because they're the ones that should have to fight for the money, since they're the one in control of the stormwater management. Other than that, everyone has to pay a minimum, because the town will flood, the lake will smell, it'll dry up, become toxic, and then everyone will move and our houses will go back to 30,000. Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
And I think I'm not able
Your
to adjust
baked
these
salmon
because
is damn good.
What? Say it again. Oh, yeah. And eat the lobster French toast at Drift. It's really good, whoever's listening out there.
it's wireless, but it says it's on.
Press on, Christine.
So the keyboard's not working. That's why I'm not able to adjust the numbers here.
no
but
wonder.
it does say it's on, but it's not lit up or anything.
That's too bad.
But that's okay. We will move on from the spreadsheet here, but there's, oh, now it looks like it's working here. Okay.
Now you can adjust the cell.
All right. Oh,
I got a blank.
300.
Yep, now it lets me change that. So obviously, as we increase that ERU rate per year, it will be able to cover things like the capital expenditures, but, so that's, I think, two topics for further discussion is if we set the residential tiers and what those tiers are, also how much of the capital expenditures will be covered with the stormwater utility program beyond just the operation and maintenance costs. So moving on back to the presentation here. I think we, did all this, went back to the start. So I wanted to talk a little bit today too about how to treat condos and mixed-use parcels. There are a number of residential condos and commercial condos within the city. Often those, I mean, if you do include them if you set tiers, you could include them in the lower tier because they're expected to have less impervious surface. Another way to do that is to actually calculate the impervious surface for those counties and charge them some sort of fraction of the ERU. That's what the city of Alexandria does. I think they charge them 0.6 of a full ERU. And then also some things to consider if you charge those individual condo units separately, or if you bill the condo association, the parcel itself. So those are things that have to be considered as well. If you do the fraction of the ERU, you can then just charge directly to the condo unit owners. So mixed use with both commercial and residential, that can be a little tricky too, how you handle that. If there's a building with maybe stores on the bottom, then you have people living on top. So those can be handled different ways. They can be treated similar to how you will handle the condos, maybe a fraction of the ERU to both the commercial and the residential owners within those mixed-use parcels. Or they can be, I'll just build a flat rate as you would another commercial property, just include the mixed use all as commercial. Or you can look at it based on the percentage of impervious surface for each of the commercial space versus a residential space and get a little bit more detailed. So those are some things to consider as well. I'm not sure how many mixed use parcels you have in the city right now. I don't think it's too many. But it's something you have to consider before you can actually charge a rate. Okay. So we talked about a little bit about this before. I'm just trying to consider providing credits and incentives for people to reduce the impervious surface on their property. So most stormwater utilities do offer some sort of reduction through a credit program that will reduce the fees. You know, from what I've seen before, not a whole lot of people apply for credits, so you don't have to assume a huge reduction in your revenue, but it is something to consider. Usually the application process is just once a year to reduce the administrative burden. It's not an open process that people can just submit applications for throughout the year. So you do have to consider what that reduction might be, though. You have to make a lot of assumptions, either a percentage reduction or a cost reduction. At the moment, Dave had assumed about $10,000 annual reduction based on credits. And then you also have to consider how long those credits will apply once someone does apply for those credits. Typically, it's about 3 years that they'll be given that reduction, and then they'll have to reapply again if they want to continue to receive the credit. And so the next question is just what practices you want to consider if you do want to provide credits, and how much credit will be applied. And I provided some examples from Fairfax City for what they're doing. So these are structural stormwater best management practices. And there's different considerations for whether or not it's a condition of new construction that they have a BMP on their property. And they still get a credit, but it might not be as much as a legacy property that voluntarily put a best management practice on their property. And Fairfax City does allow those credits to be good for 3 years after the application is approved. Some other considerations are non-structural best management practices, such as education programs, no fertilizer programs, pledges, things like that. So most cities that have stormwater utilities do allow for a non-structural credit as well. Any questions on those?
Yes, I have a question. So once a year, let's just say, I would apply for a credit, and it could be any one of that combination.
Correct.
So I could apply for nutrient management planning up to 10%, and on the previous slide, there's legacy voluntary, that's another 20%. So I would have a 30% reduction.
Right, and usually
Potentially.
there's a maximum set,
There is a,
like
okay.
a 50%
Okay.
reduction. So you can add different practices to get more credits, but up to a maximum. Yep.
Do the BMPs convey to a new owner, or would a new property owner have to start all over?
That's a good question. Usually, I would think it would convey.
Okay, just curious.
If the application was approved for that parcel for the next 3 years,
Yeah.
I would think it would convey.
Okay.
Have you considered whether there's currently an employee in City Hall who would be handling this? Or are you anticipating having to have a consultant here or a part-time new employee?
Right. It is usually something that's run by the city, and it's a program that would have to be set up, obviously, and how the city would handle reviewing those credit applications on a yearly basis.
True, and I just am concerned we haven't even
You're
figured that out.
getting us off track,
Okay.
Susan. You're off track. Go on.
No, but that is something, same for the appeals as well,
Right.
for allowing
Same
for
thing.
appeals. When the appeals come in, someone in the city has to look at them and review them and decide if they're going to be approved or not. So for all stormwater utilities, you have to allow for an appeal process. which would allow any property owner to appeal the billing. So that's, for an example, if someone has pervious pavement on their driveway, they don't think they should be charged for all of that as pervious surface, they can appeal to get that impervious percentage on their property reduced, to reduce their fee. So typically, the appeals for stormwater utilities that are allowed include a wrong account being charged. Obviously, someone should be able to appeal that. If the property is incorrectly classified as having more impervious surface than what is included in the evaluation. The property being invoiced qualifies as a side yard to a residential property. If the impervious area has been removed, obviously since 2017, there could have been some impervious surface that's been removed from what was used for these calculations. If the impervious area differs in size than what was billed, the impervious surface have been specifically designed to be pervious or porous, as in the example described with putting in the pervious driveway. So that the city staff will be responsible with developing a procedure and process to deal with those appeals as well. All right. Any questions on the appeals? Yep.
Is it, do jurisdictions generally treat one house on 2 lots in a certain way? Is it assigned to the building?
If there's 2 different parcels, each parcel would be evaluated separately for the impervious surface.
And in your experience, Christine, I'm assuming that as the magnitude of this stormwater impact fee increases, the incentive, of course, to try to get these, these
For the credits. Yeah.
credit increases. So I assume you've seen that.
I have, but I still,
Like if it's 30%, if it's a percentage, if it's $500, people are more interested in that 30% rebate or reduction than they are if the whole fee is only $200 a year. That's just reality. But what has your company found about how that works?
we haven't seen a whole lot of people submitting for credits.
5 to 10%.
No matter what the fee
you're saying,
is. So
5 to 10%.
yeah.
Okay.
And Black and Veatch has done a good study of that too, which gives those percentages throughout the country of people that actually do apply for those credits. So, yep.
Can you give us other examples of what other towns have done as far as credits? Is Fairfax City pretty?
Fairfax City is similar to what I've
Similar.
seen the city of Alexandria, what they've used, what Annapolis has done. There is the Black and Veatch study that I referred to has a lot of good information too on what people have provided for credits. Whether it's, some have only provided for structural best management practices, but most do allow for non-structural as well.
And what's the most common credit that people will apply for?
I would guess probably like rain barrels or putting in sort of a rain garden, some sort of
trees,
detention on their
maybe?
property, but
Planting trees?
Fertilizer.
Fertilizer, yeah, you can't say.
fertilizer, pledge.
How is that fertilizer pledge ever enforced? That really worries me. I would be reluctant for the city. I don't know how Kevin feels. That's more important probably. To say, I pledge not to use these toxic fertilizers for 3 years.
I like my grass green.
I mean, it just seems untenable.
We're off track again. Get back to.
I'm towards the end here.
Oh, great.
so-
Okay.
I'm just reviewing our goals and objectives. I think hopefully, does anyone have any questions on that ERU concept?
I think we've decided that we do want to use credits, and we do want to recognize appeals, and we do want to recognize incentives. So I think we know that we want those 3 things for sure. We just wasted all of our time not deciding exactly which credits we want to have. So we're going to have to spend time doing that because we have to recommend to you the incentives and credits that we want to use.
That's also something that can be decided on later. I have seen like City of Alexandria had implemented credits in phases. So they didn't like start with when they started billing people, they didn't have that credit program in place right away.
That's good information
So
for us
it
to
is
know.
something that you can develop over time as
So
well.
administrative credits might be easier to do first and then go to
Correct.
structural,
Yep.
things like that.
That's good stuff.
That's, yeah.
Say, Jay, to your, to what you just brought up, is that, I know we're running out of time, was this something that we can take up in October?
Depends on how far you mean how many tiers and what we want them to be?
Yes, because October is determination of preliminary rates or ranges of
Yeah,
rates.
we got to get through credits before we get into money, in my opinion. We could do it backwards or forwards or whatever. It's up to.
Well,
it's up
deciding
to-
on credits for the fee is really going to be how much you expect, your community to be submitting credit applications for. If you think $10,000 reduction in the revenue is enough, or if you think a lot of people are going to be wanting to apply for these credits, maybe we increase that reduction. But that's really the only thing that we need to determine regarding credits before we can determine a fee.
Probably,
Lots of retired people here.
Yes, I was gonna, I was gonna say the same.
Could be an outlier.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If
I
we're-
wouldn't rely on any forecast of 5 to 10% that you've seen in places like, people
Probably
who are
more
working full.
participation. That's
they're-
good.
Well, yes and no, but, people working full-time in Fairfax City and Alexandra have, different.
let's get back on track.
So I
Did we get everything answered that we wanted to answer?
yeah, just reviewing the goals here. We went through the variables. We do need to touch in October again on the residential tiers, deciding on what that would be in the expenditure basis, how much basically revenue you want to generate to cover some of the capital expenditures as well, because the fee will obviously be it's very dependent on that, how much revenue you do want to generate.
Would it be helpful to have a breakdown in a table format to show where the breakout is for the tiers?
Yep.
There might be a cluster that would
Yes.
show a natural break.
Yeah, and Dave has
we
done
do
that
that?
analysis. I just haven't
Okay.
pulled it out in a good presentation format yet, so I will do that before October.
Okay. Because I think that'll make it fairly easy
Yep.
to do.
Does anybody want to discuss the other two big ones, condos, how we want to treat them, and/or the mixed-use piece? Because that'll impact kind of what we
Could I
put
ask
together for next month.
Janice, because she lives in a condo.
Yeah, I live in a condo, and I'll tell you what we did in Fairfax City. And this is an example. Condominiums are charged a two-part fee. First, each individual condominium owner receives a bill. It's billed as one ERU, which is $28.80 annually.
Which is based on 500 square feet of impervious surface, right?
But
Or-
it's,
okay.
we simply took all condominiums and said we're going to charge them one ERU, no matter the size of the condominium. The second part is that the land that the building sits on is charged ERUs. My building sits on 2 acres, it's 96 units, and we are charged, that the fee calculation for that is 57 ERUs. So it's 57 times 2880. And that's an annual bill from the city to the condominium building, and then that's divided by 96 units, and we pay that through our condo fees. So that's the way that it's done. I own a unit here in the Arc. There are 30 units. There are, if you look at the property itself, the front of the building, there's a little strip with plantings, and in the rear, there is a very small strip of grass. Basically, it's impervious surface, lot line to lot line. So it would be possible to charge every unit a certain amount of money and then something else for all the asphalt, because there's a lot of asphalt there.
Like a homeowner's association.
Did they measure your roof line and the asphalt and come to 57? Is that how they got that number?
I would have to ask specifically the person who does stormwater to see exactly how they divided that out. But it's basically looking at the impervious surface, which is roof line and parking lot and sidewalks versus the green space that's available.
And did they bill the condo unit or the individual condo owner or the,
It's a two-step
so
process.
one big bill to the
One big
association?
bill to the association.
individual
and
unit
each
owner would get-
individual, owner will get a bill as well.
And did the
So the
association
individual
bother
feels like
make,
they're
like, having,
Right,
like, if you own 1/8 of a building versus a bigger unit, did the
some that don't
association
have an
bother, did the
individual
association
bill,
charge all
bill the water
57
and sewer
owners the
Our,
same?
our condominium fees are based on, most places, condominiums are based on square footage. How much square
Absolutely,
footage you
right.
own. In my building, it's based on a tier system. So there are 4 different categories.
Right.
And you are charged, your condo fee is based on one of those categories. And it's blatantly unfair. I have a unit that's 600, I might as well tell you this. I have a unit that's 1,650 square feet. And the other 2 types of units that are in the same category, category 4, one unit is a little over 2,000 square feet and the other one's 2,100 square feet. So I'm being charged, as far as I'm concerned, 2 months condo fees. I could get 2 months free if I was in the lower category, but.
Well, I can tell you,
Did the city make that decision, or did
No,
your
it was,
condo?
it was the
association.
condo, it was the
Did your
builders,
condo
it
association
was
make
when
it?
the builder set it up and what she was thinking about, I have no idea.
You could change that, Janice, like, there's a condo here where we used to own a unit, the
yeah,
goal,
but- well,
it's
let's-
done by
let's
square
not-
footage,
let's
so
not get off
that's,
to
that's
that,
easy for
so.
the condo association to figure out what's most equitable for them, right? And once they get that bill for the
That
common
would
areas,
be least administrative burden on the city to
Right.
just charge the condo building directly.
for their common space,
Right.
yeah.
Why did Fairfax City decide to charge the condo unit owner twice? With the HOA and then the
A two-part,
Yeah, the two parts. That seems much more complicated than it needs to be.
it's, because, well, I know why it is. It's because that there were 2 types of property bills that were assessed to begin with. There was each individual owner receives a tax bill for their property. But then we own property jointly, so we are taxed for that as well. And we have communities that have a lot of private parkland, they have a lot of open space, so they're charged the same way. You're charged for what you owe individually and what you owe collectively. There's a real estate bill for that, so that's why it's a two-part process.
So in, like, it would be helpful, and I mean, I could talk to Patricia or somebody at One Virginia, or Edgewater, and somebody at Henlopen, and ask them how they structure their fees. You know, would they be able to bill? Do we bill anybody individually in a condo in the city? for prop-
Yes.
Oh, we do?
Some we do.
Oh, okay, so we have that information.
I say we do, yeah.
Have which,
I don't know that,
have
but yeah.
which information?
Like property taxes, whereas it's like a collective water meter, so the condo
right.
association is billed for water and wastewater, and then they divvy it up typically, well, I saw it at the condo at Fifth and Sussex Street, they divide it up by square footage, and so it's pretty equitable, actually, except,
How do they do it at New Bold Square?
Individuals, right?
For
You get
which,
your own
for
bill.
which piece?
For anything? I mean, do you pay any taxes on your own, or does everything go through the condo association?
Yeah. Let me think. The water and sewer go to individual units.
Oh.
The taxes go to individual units.
Oh, okay.
The trash goes to individual units. What else?
But we have some the
And
other
do
way
those,
as well, for
do
sure.
those bills come from your condo association?
From
or
the
they come
city.
from the
City,
city?
yeah.
Oh, they
because
come
they're
from
all
the city.
sub-metered
That's
on,
right, you
yeah.
guys are all, you all have separate ownership.
Oh, so what about the parking lot and stuff like that? When it needs to be asphalted or something?
Right now, we don't pay anything on that.
But if you had to repair it, the
Then who would pay?
association would divvy that out, right?
Right. You share the cost of
Yes.
maintenance of the
Okay,
parking lot.
so the city will probably build, you have a condo
That seems to
association?
line up with what
Yes.
they're doing.
Yeah,
That would probably
individual.
bill them.
Yeah.
Like for the parking
Yeah.
lot, the city will bill for stormwater to the,
Association.
is it 8 owners you have there?
40.
40, oh, wow.
Press on, Christine.
Any other little chat on mixed use? What do we want to do with mixed
Yes,
use?
let's do that. We just covered condos.
I got a couple things I got to
Mixed
check off,
use.
right?
Well, mixed use is, there's not that much, is there? Like on the alley, what's Wilmington Avenue, actually. There's apartments above a lot of those stores.
On Rehoboth Avenue too, there's a fair bit.
How many mixed-use units do we have in the town?
Not a lot, but how do we want to treat them?
And
Commercial?
those are probably all owned by a single person?
That I don't know. That's a good question.
Because otherwise it's a condo.
Yeah.
Well, they're apartments for rent, they're apartments, though.
Well, but somebody, either they're owned, the whole
Right.
structure is owned by one entity, or it's owned separately, which case I'm guessing that's more akin to a condo, in which
Yeah.
case you could bill the commercial and bill the residential just as you would.
So if
I
I
don't
live
know.
in an
What-
apartment above
Whatever the-
Domino's,
Like Finn's or something has apartments above it,
We-
Finn's Restaurant.
We send them one bill, is that right? Do you have any residences on any of your structures? No.
do you send one bill to the guy who owns the land, or do you send?
I don't know.
Okay, I think
I'm
we
sure
need to
that's
find
true.
that out.
That would be helpful.
Yeah,
That would be helpful to know.
okay, that's something we need to find out. I'd like to know how many mixed
What I was
uses
gonna say,
we
how's it
have
run
and
through? What is
They
how
got a
we
meter,
bill
they get a
them.
bill.
Yeah, but I bet the apartment has a.
I think Donna Moore would be able to give us quickly a pretty accurate answer about the mixed-use properties and how many of them are owned by one person, and therefore the property taxes go to one LLC or one person. I actually don't think that's a big problem. Do you, Kevin? I don't see that's
No,
a huge problem.
Are we
That's the
gonna,
least of our problems, in my
Tell me which way to go. We'll be happy.
are we gonna count pools as impervious surface? Probably they are.
They are.
They are. It's,
They are.
otherwise it's
Count
a
what?
leaky pool.
So,
Oh,
so there's no credit,
That's
No
a
credit
luxury.
for a pool.
no credit reduction for having a
That's a
pool.
luxury tax.
That's tough. That's tough.
Concrete
All right,
decks,
so-
of course, are.
The water that hits a pool never makes it to anywhere else.
Goes into the
Flows
sewer
onto the
system.
concrete deck and,
No,
you know.
no.
It goes into the sewer.
It stays, no.
Where's your pump out go? Does it go into the city wastewater or city stormwater? When you pump out your pools? Your
By
pool-
law, you're
it
supposed to hire a
overruns somewhere.
company, well, you're supposed to hire a tanker truck.
if-
I've seen violations.
All the time.
That's
But
not happening.
Tanker truck takes the water out, puts
The
it
law
right in the
is you
stormwater.
hire, it's expensive, right,
Let's get
Kevin? The
back-
tank truck
let's
has
get back
to
on
take
track.
it out.
I'm about ready to end, I'm about to come to the end of my rope. We are, let's get back on track. We're gonna have one less member on this committee if we don't get our questions squared away.
But you're the chairperson,
I'm at
Jay.
the end of the rope. Keep going, Christine.
So mixed use
Travel
parcels,
safely. I
we'll
hope
try to
there's
follow
no
up on next
rain.
month as
I get to
well.
do this again in 4 hours.
Oh, no.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Bye, Janice.
Based on the ownership information that we'll look into. And so for October, we do want to focus mainly on trying to determine what those initial rates would be, which will include also determining how much revenue you want to generate and how much of the capital expenditures you want to cover with the fee.
Have we covered credits, incentives, and appeals to your satisfaction?
As part of that discussion in October, we can determine what percentage you think will be applying for credits and then make that reduction based on that, so.
Yeah, and if I could just interject, with respect to the credits and the incentives, I think if we make a broad generalization or an assumption as to what that loss of revenue would be, that meets our needs at this point in time. At some point in time, we're gonna have to document all those things that we're gonna offer credit for, and that'll be part of the implementation guidance. But at this point, if we can just agree on what that number ought to be for our planning, then I think we should be fine.
And we'll give, and that's the kind of information that we'll give to Christine.
Jay, I would like to request you as a commissioner, go back to the mayor and commissioners and tell them that part of implementing this will be that they make a change in the code that requires all new construction to have impervious surfaces, or pervious surfaces, and people who are doing a certain percentage of repairs to their existing hard surfaces, at some point, as Dewey Beach requires, they require them to change it to pervious. So.
Absolutely, that,
So
we can
I
all
think,
support that, right?
also says to the mayor and commissioners is that they have a role in this, and their role is to make sure that we don't have stormwater runoff and that we have pervious surfaces everywhere. I mean, I can tell you that second block of Virginia Avenue, the driveway is like a waterfall that runs right down into the basement of the guy who owns the house across the street.
Isn't that something?
And the people who put it in were appalled. The city didn't require it to be pervious.
Correct. I took pictures of that.
So,
Okay.
Okay, so that would be the focus in October, and then November is actually developing those recommendations
Now-
for the mayor and commissioners.
Great. Say that again?
October, we'll be trying to nail down those rates more, including breaking out those tiers and looking at those options for putting the residential properties in different tiers. And then November, we'll be developing the recommendations for the mayor and commissioners.
And at that point in time, you'll go forward with you'll start formulating the utility ordinance. Is that correct?
Well, it needs to be approved before it can move forward. But yes.
Okay.
And
But
then more details will be involved with how you actually bill the property owners through the real estate
we'll
tax
talk.
or
We'll
through
talk.
other ways, so.
We'll talk about the path forward. Okay, great. Great. Am I missing?
do you want a motion to adjourn?
Chet.
Oh,
Not yet, although
Do
although
we
yes.
have a
90
meeting time
seconds
for October?
remaining.
Do we have a meeting date for October?
Oh, that's, yeah. Yom Kippur begins at sundown on the 4th of October. If anybody has a problem or needs to, we need to talk or send me an email, and we'll just, I think we're good to go. But just in case, I want to have everybody have that opportunity to communicate with me that they can't be here because of.
yeah,
of
Jay,
Yom Kippur.
I won't be here on that day.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes,
It
of
came up
course.
before. Do we have access to the spreadsheet? At least so we can consult it, if only read-only? Because you're asking, we have a big ask for next
Right.
meeting, but if you can't see it only when we get here, it's hard.
Right.
That would be one. And two, is there any revenue from commercial properties in that spreadsheet?
Yes,
Okay,
that's included as well. Yep.
got it.
And Dave has a concern that if it's shared with the task force, it would have to be shared with the public as well, which is a concern. So I am willing to create PDFs of various scenarios with the spreadsheet to hand out to you all that could also be made public. Dave is very concerned about anyone from the public getting their hands on the spreadsheet and constrain it in a different way than it's intended to. So.
You need to try to do that. You need to try to get that converted to a PDF and I can't remember how Abrams did theirs, but the spreadsheet is very helpful and you're finding that out.
Yep.
Like, Christine, is it a privacy consideration? Like, to me, it would be better to get this out to us and to the public. The sooner the better. But I guess other people feel differently.
Kevin, Abrams was the water and sewer,
Yes.
because the task force got access to the spreadsheet.
Okay.
But you couldn't change it, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. He had a spreadsheet that you can, because I used it, you could go through and make different scenarios and it stayed the same.
I think the issue, though, is it has to be posted because of FOIA. And are you at the point where you want to drop that bomb? Or do you want to manage how that's rolled out?
Education.
Everything we've had so far has been accessible by the public. We've not seen anything that wasn't.
Except any data set. To me,
We
the
understand
public
that,
is
but
gonna get
if by
worried.
definition, if that's available to us, it will have to be made to the public. So you're choosing, how badly do you want us to have it? I'd love to have it, but I also recognize that there's a counter indication that might not be so helpful.
I think everything that's put out there needs to be labeled pre-decisional draft, caveated to death. That's what we used to do to EPA all the time.
tentative or preliminary or something?
Because that initial fee information is going to be on there, so
I
people may
think
get
that's-
wrapped up in that. But yeah, we should have some sort of notice on it that it's
Yeah, I think that's,
still very
I
draft.
think it's early for that, as much as,
I think it's a little dangerous to put out there.
and you're the consultant, I presume that the ideas, it's probably too early to have that in the public facing.
Well, yeah, once initial fees get out there, it's going to
Okay.
generate some discussion.
The sooner you get your presentation to us, this time we had a couple, few days. The sooner you get that to us, the better we can prepare.
Okay.
And I don't know how to figure out the spreadsheet, but you might, different tiered or something, 2-tier, 3. Kevin probably has 6 ideas,
I
but
think we want it, but we understand why we can't.
yeah.
My office is always open if anybody wants to come by and look at that spreadsheet.
Oh, I'm going to take you up on that, Kevin. You mean that I can call you tomorrow morning?
Never mind.
If there's no other discussion, I
Move to
declare
adjourn.
this meeting ad-
And what is the date for the next meeting?
Unless we have to change, it's for October.
Tuesday, the 4th.
Right.
Yeah, and I think we're good to go on 4 October.
Okay.
I hope.
1 PM? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 1 PM. Yep. I declare this meeting adjourned.